So traditional versus self-publishing, which is also sometimes called indie publishing, the two terms mean the same thing to me, is again another huge debate in writer circles and with writers. And there's a huge philosophical difference between these two. There's people who are just desperately committed to the traditional publishing, where they want to go with one of the big publishing houses and they want to get an agent and they want to get in advance and sell their book and have the publishing company promote it and be in bookstores, and versus self-publishers who do all the different parts of getting their book to the reader themselves, and they do everything that publishers have traditionally done for authors. And so they do all of the formatting, they do the editing, I guess, first, they do the formatting, they do the production, they create covers, and then they do all the marketing and even after sale support if there's a problem with the book. With self-publishing, the reader would complain directly to the author instead of going to one of the publishing companies. And so traditional is what most of the public would think about as publishing. When somebody thinks about somebody writing books and publishing, they think that the writer writes the book and then they submit it to a bunch of agents. And if they're lucky, one of those agents agrees to take them on as a client. And then that agent might give them some advice how to make the book more marketable or how to change it. And then the agent takes that manuscript and they go to various publishers and they try to sell the manuscript to publishers. And if they're really, really lucky, they get a publisher who's interested, or they get multiple publishers who are interested, and they get a bidding war. And the publisher then buys the rights to the book, and they would then probably edit it, and they'd make a cover up for it, and they'd do a print run, and they'd send it out to bookstores where it'd go on the shelves, and people would buy it and read the book. And that's how people think about publishing. And it's a really long, slow, and hard process. People just get ground down when they're just submitting to agent after agent after agent after agent and getting rejection and rejection and rejection. And then they get an agent, and the agent submitting to publisher after publisher after publisher, and they're getting rejection, 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 rejection. And then there's people who've just had the dream experience where they get an agent and they get a good publisher and they get a lot of support for their book, and it goes out and it flops and it gets to the bookstores and readers just aren't interested, and then it's all for naught. And there's people who have had a really successful debut book, everything worked including readers being excited about it, and then on their second or their third book it doesn't perform as well and the publishers lose interest in them. And so this actually happened to George R.R. Martin, that he had quite a successful first book, and then he had a more successful second book. So he's exactly on the right trajectory to be a writing success. And then his third book flopped. And the publisher had been investing more money in each of his books because he seemed to be on an upwards trajectory. And when the third book flopped, he said he was just dead in the water. No publisher would consider his books anymore. He was just considered somebody who wasn't sellable, that he didn't deliver on this ever-increasing audience sales for each book. And so luckily for him, he went into writing in Hollywood for television, and he worked in that area for a while, and he was eventually able to come back into writing, and he got into writing books and eventually wrote Game of Thrones and became kind of the household name that he is now. But after his third book flopped, he was actually taking seminars, real estate seminars, because he's thinking about going into real estate investing, and that's how he was going to make money. He'd given up on writing entirely. And somebody in Hollywood found this third book that flopped, really liked it, and contacted George R.R. Martin, and that's how he ended up getting into Hollywood. And so he got very, very, very lucky after he'd been unlucky and his publishing career had been derailed. There's huge variations in pay for traditional publishing, and all sorts of people who have been traditionally published, when they reveal what the pay is like, it's really unbelievably low. And so there was a woman who wrote a book called Iron Widow, and it was a really great debut. She got the agent, she got the publisher, there was a lot of interest in her book, there was a huge print run, people loved it, it was getting a lot of interest. And she said she'd signed a contract for 2 books with them, Iron Widow and the sequel. And she said she couldn't afford to work on the sequel because she got paid so little. She had to go out and work to basically support herself, and that delayed the sequel because she was earning money to live on while she was trying to write the sequel book. And so even though she was a massive success, the pay didn't reflect that. Compared to this, people like Stephen King and George R. R. Martin and J.K. Rowling clearly are making gobs and gobs of money. Even the kind of Neil Gaimans and the John Scalzis, and there's people who are making good money with traditional publishing, but there's a ton of people who are working hard to break in and can't, and there's people who've broken in and then found that the reality isn't what they hoped it would be. Self-publishing, in contrast, is just really going from the writer directly to the readers. You might be going through a site like Amazon, that's what I do, but there are people who will sell their books directly from their own website. And so they don't even have an Amazon involved. They just write the books and then they either print them up and sell out print copies to readers who want them, or they create ebooks and they digitally distribute it to readers, their ebooks. And this removes all of these barriers at all of the different parts that you have with traditional publishing. So it's just not possible to have a situation like George R. R. Martin where they have a book that flops and they then become viewed as unpublishable in self-publishing, because you're the one deciding everything yourself. You're deciding what to invest in your books, what to spend, and any writer can always write another book if they want to and then release it. And you can release books for basically nothing. You can release for literally free if you want, if that's what you choose to do. And so there's nothing to stop a self-published writer. They can just keep putting out books as long as they're interested in writing them. Brandon Sanderson is kind of a poster child for traditionally published success. He's kind of like probably the biggest fantasy writer writing today. And during COVID, he wrote 4 books, which he then self-published using Kickstarter. And so he released them on Kickstarter. He didn't put them through a traditional publishing company. And to me, this is something that I could do an entire presentation on just this, but self-publishing seems to be the new model. It seems to be the new way that the industry of people writing creative fiction, and then that fiction getting to customers, every year there's a shift to more and more indie publishing away from traditional publishing. And I think already many of us view the kind of big publishers of the past in New York kind of picking who gets to be the next big author and promoting their works. That's becoming something that is more and more old-fashioned. So I don't think it's worth a new author trying to break into that old system, because that system is dying. It's being replaced by a new industry. And so indie publishing, traditional authors are sort of shifting over to indie publishing. And I think kind of new authors that try to break into traditional publishing are likely not having a good time. It'll be really interesting to me if one of the big people like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling self-publishes a book, does indie publishing. And they certainly have the money, so they could put together the infrastructure to have people to help them with all the parts of preparing the book for release. And it'll be really interesting if they did that. It was incredibly interesting when Brandon Sanderson did that and sold his books directly to his readers through Kickstarter. Vanity and hybrid publishers are, vanity publishers have been around forever, and hybrid publishers are kind of more of a new phenomenon. And years ago, there used to be a website called Corrosion, and it's KU 50 shin or something like that. It had a very weird spelling, and it was kind of like Slashdot, and it was popular in the day. It's basically shut down now. And there was a user on this site called Local Roger who wrote this sci-fi story called The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect that got a ton of interest, and people were reading a free copy that had been posted just to the web. And it was kind of probably the first sort of thing that looked like a book, looked like a novel that had been posted to the web to read for free that I ever really saw. Everything before that was unbelievably amateurish, and this was the first thing that really looked like a novel that somebody had put effort into. And he got a lot of interest from readers on corrosion, and he wasn't going to go through a publisher, and he was debating how to do this. And he tried like a tip jar, and he tried different approaches to selling his writing online. And people kept saying to him, just go and print up a whole bunch of versions of your book and sell them to us. We want a print copy of this book. We're ready to pay for it. So just make it and sell it to us. And one of the things he wrote that I thought was really interesting is he said that he learned from his writing mentor that it's a deeply shameful thing to pay someone to publish your writing. And back in the day when traditional publishing was the only game in town, this was true. Basically, you would go through and a traditional publisher would give you an advance and buy your book, and then they'd pay for all the costs, and then they'd send you royalties once you sold enough books to exceed your advance. And vanity publishers were on the side, and these kind of pretended to be publishers, and they'd go to authors and they'd say, oh, we love your book, it's so wonderful. And then they'd try to get the person to pay them money to publish it. And this was, pretty close to an out and out scam. This was just to prey on new authors who didn't understand how publishing worked. And so rules like this, that it's a deeply shameful thing to pay somebody to publish your writing, evolved back in this model when there was only traditional and vanity publishing, and nothing like self-publishing or indie publishing really existed at the time. Now, looking back, it's conceivable to me that there could be a vanity publisher who actually would do a good job, that they basically had all of the infrastructure that a publisher had, and they were just offering that for sale instead of getting picked up by a traditional publisher. So to me, the model isn't necessarily inherently a scam. I could imagine something like that for somebody who just didn't want to go through the whole process of finding an agent and negotiating a contract with a publisher and going through everything with the publisher, or somebody who wanted more control over parts of the process than they get with a traditional publisher, might be willing to front the money and publish their own book. Maybe like a CEO who is going to be, or a celebrity who is going to be publishing their memoirs or a business book or something like that. But the vast majority of vanity presses then and now are scams. So this is like, I'm thinking like maybe there is a Nigerian prince out there who wants to send you money. The good vanity presses would be few and far between. Nowadays, there are new things called hybrid publishers. And any one of these hybrid publishers, if anyone ever mentions the word vanity press around them, and they always say, we're not a vanity press, we're a hybrid publisher. But most of us who look at them find them vanity publishers under a thin coat of paint, that they're doing the exact same thing vanity publishers always have, and they're just calling themselves hybrid publishers. These offer the services that traditionally publishers would have offered, and they sort of offer to be paid to do things that self-publishers do themselves. So all the things I'm talking about that you could do to self-publish your book, hybrid publishers basically say, we'll do that for you for pay. So if there's something that you don't want to do, they'll do it. If you don't want to edit your book, you can pay them and they'll edit your book for you. If you don't want to proofread your book or get friends to proofread your book, you can pay them and they'll proofread your book for them. If you don't want to format your book yourself, you can pay them and they'll format the book for you. If you don't want to hire a cover artist yourself and make your own cover, you can hire them and they'll make a cover for you. If you don't want to advertise your own book, you can pay them and they'll do the advertising for you. And so their argument is that they are sort of specialists at all of these different activities. And rather than selling your book to a traditional publisher, you can a la carte buy the parts that you need from them. And so I think there's a little bit more of a possibility of decent hybrid publishers out there. But again, the vast majority of them are scams. And I would say for 99% of writers, they shouldn't touch hybrid publishers or vanity publishers with a 10-foot pole. They should totally steer clear of them. But I'm open to the idea that there's a tiny number of authors that it would make sense, and that these people, that a hybrid publisher maybe would have a package deal of services that might be worthwhile. In general, historically, the model has been that money should always flow to the author, never away from them. So you should always be getting paid as the writer. You should never be paying. And this has never been an absolute truth. So there was some times in the past where agents would get authors to pay them a small amount of money to cover postage when they were sending out manuscripts. And so some agents would say, I'm not going to front you the money to be printing out your manuscripts and mailing it off to publishers. I'm willing to do that, but I'm not going to pay for the printing costs and the postage costs. And so they'd ask for a small amount of money on an ongoing basis from writers to do this. Even this, oftentimes it was a scam. Oftentimes there'd be unethical agents who'd collect this money from authors saying that they were sending out manuscripts, and then some of them just wouldn't even be sending out the manuscripts, or they would be overcharging the they'd be overcharging the authors. So postage would be less than $1, but they charge the author $5, $10, or $15 for postage, and that was a way for them to make money. For self-publishers, even if you're not hiring a hybrid publisher, there's all sorts of people that you can hire that are very good at what they do and will be helpful for you to produce a book. And in those cases, money is going to flow away from the author to the people providing those services. These people aren't just volunteering. So you might hire an editor, and I talked about that earlier, how some people have found hiring developmental editors and other types of editors have been useful for preparing their works. And those editors are going to want to get paid. And so if you want to hire them to do it, you're going to have to pay them. Many people find it awkward figuring out the formatting software. I find it pretty straightforward, but some people struggle with it. And so they want to hire somebody to format their book. Many, many, many authors don't have much of an artistic eye. I put myself in this group. And so they'll pay people to do a cover for them. And that's really, really common. I'm going to be talking about that in detail. And I'd say that's probably the first thing you should purchase. If you only have a small amount of money to release your book, buying a cover is probably where the first $50 or $100 should go. And so that's a situation that money's going from the author to the cover artist, and it violates this principle that money isn't flowing to you, it's flowing away from you. But it makes sense. Who else is going to pay the artist to make a cover for your book? Regardless, I think writers need to be deeply cautious with anyone who wants money from you. And I think a good guiding principle would be to only pay people who you've sought out. If somebody ever contacts you and says, hey, you can pay me to do this thing for you, steer clear of that person. Only hire the people when you have decided I need to hire a cover artist, and you go out looking at them and you go to someone who's a cover artist and you say, I want to hire you to create a cover for my next book. That's the only time you should be paying money. If someone contacts you, don't ever pay them money. And even when you're the one reaching out, you want to vet them. You want to make sure that they can deliver on what they're doing. You want to make sure they're a reliable worker. You want to be as careful as you possibly can when you're hiring people. You perhaps don't want to pay them in advance. You might want to use a site like Fiverr, which is an intermediary, and the funds are basically escrowed. The person doing the work doesn't get paid until you say that they've worked on it and developed it to an acceptable standard. Beta readers are the very, very, very first people to read your book in its entirety, ideally in a form that is what you're going to release to the public. So it goes out to beta readers and maybe advanced review copy readers right before the book's released. Well, maybe a month or two before the book's released. And what you have at that point should be as ready for release as you can possibly get it as a writer. And then these people are the first ones to read it, and they give you feedback. And that feedback can be all sorts of things, but it's their reaction to the book. And so it's a chance before it's released to the public and the book's out there for you to plug plot holes or fix mistakes, like I said earlier about that I've forgotten the page numbers on a page and anything like that. These are your first, and it's a small group of readers that can notice problems and you can fix them. And then when it goes out to the readers at large, the book should then be better. And there's a quote I really like from Neil Gaiman, that when people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them, they are almost always right. when they tell you exactly what they think is wrong and how to fix it, they are almost always wrong. And I've heard this in other contexts. I've heard this with board game design and all sorts of other creative things. And I think it's a really interesting thing. And I think he's exactly right. So if a beta reader sort of says, you should change this to this, be really careful. They're not the writer. And if they're telling you specific things to do, probably they're wrong about that. But if the beta readers say, I was really unsatisfied by the conclusion, I thought there was going to be some real payoff, but then in the end, it was just really disappointing how it ended. It was kind of more of a fizzle instead of a climax. Then they're probably right. There's a problem with the ending, the fact that they have that reaction. With your first novel, it's going to be really, really, really hard to find beta readers, because you not only want people who read that genre, you want people who like your writing. And so it's easy for Stephen King to find beta readers. He just gets people who like to read his books, and then he gives an advance copy to a subset of them and collects information from them. For your first book, literally no one in the world likes to read your books because you've never released one before. And so that's going to be really, really hard. And beta readers who aren't the type of person that would read your book are almost useless. You get the kind of feedback that I've mentioned a few times from the romance author, that she wants my books to be more like a romance book, and that's just not what I'm writing. Some authors will really try to guide beta readers through exactly the feedback that they have, and they'll give them a worksheet with specific questions and prompts, and they want them, after they've read the book, to go through and fill out this sheet and give them information on their reaction to different parts of the book and different things. And beta readers hate that. If you're not paying them, you're going to have a really, really, really hard time to get people to fill that out. People just won't. They'll ignore it, and they'll just off the cuff write you a message saying how they felt about the book. And I read about one author who did this, and only one of the beta readers actually filled out the worksheet. And at the end, that beta reader said, please don't ever ask me to beta read for you again. It's more work than I can commit to. So this was kind of a one-time thing. I don't ever want to do this again. So if you have the idea about kind of worksheets and more guided feedback from beta readers don't love that. I've mentioned sensitivity readers, and you can combine these with beta readers. And so that Naomi Novik issue that she decided to remove from her book, if she'd had a sensitivity reader who read that before release, she might have been able to fix the book before it went to print, and she might have been able to avoid that entirely. Readers like me know about that because it got into the released book, and sensitivity readers mixed in with your beta readers could give you a chance to avoid things like that if they then sort of said, this part kind of rubbed me the wrong way. With formatting, this refers to going from your book just as a list of text. When I'm writing my book, I'll break it up into chapters, and I'll break it up into sections, and I'll break it up into paragraphs and sentences, obviously, but there's no formatting that's done. I don't, when I'm dealing with it, it's just text at that point. And so kind of whether it's left justified or full justified, and what the chapter looks like at the beginning, like if it has the enlarged first character of the first paragraph of the chapter and things like that, if it has some decorations around the chapter heading. I don't do any of that when I'm writing the book. When you get to formatting, that's when you do all of that. And it would be possible to just go through with a word processor and get everything set up with the word processor for it to look the way you want it to look when it's released. And then you could upload that to Amazon, and it'll go out as a book that people can buy and see. It's a lot of work to be doing that with a word processor. There's a lot of different settings you're going to have to go through, and you're going to have to resize the pages based on it. And so you'll have to go to Amazon's website, get the instructions for doing that with the word processor, and then really set up the document to meet what they need. And it won't really look that great even after you've done all of that. Amazon has its own software that's free called Kindle Create, and this basically lets you just load a book from the word processor document into it, and then it gets everything set up with this formatting. And so it makes it all look nice and gets it ready to conform to Amazon standards. It's very easy to use, and you can upload it, and it's totally free. What happened to me was there were some tweaks I needed to do basically with the Kindle Create, and sort of from the default when I just loaded the document from the word processor into Kindle Create, I needed to make changes. And it got up to the point that there was about 14 changes that I had to make for the Kindle Create software for one of my books when I loaded it in. And so whenever I found a problem or an issue with it in the released copy of it and I wanted to fix it, I'd go back and I'd edit it on the word processor. Then I'd save the Word document and I'd put it into Kindle Create and I put it through these 14 steps to get it ready for release. And it was just a pain. And it didn't look that nice. It was acceptable for a book, but it didn't really look as nice as a lot of other books did. And so there's software that you can buy that's specifically made for formatting books, and you pay for it. And so Vellum is the big software for this on Macintosh, and Atticus is the big one on PC. And I've bought Vellum, and Vellum costs something like $250, and I so I've got that and I've used it for all my books, and it doesn't have this 14-step process. Basically, I just make edits to it in Vellum, regenerate the books and upload it, and it's just an instant thing. And it was worth the $250 to me just to streamline my process. You can also hire freelancers to format your book, and these are off sites like Fiverr, and a lot of them will just use Vellum or Atticus. I was at one point going to get on Fiverr and offer to format people's books with Vellum, and just charge them and basically load it into the software, format it for them, and then send them back the files ready to go up. And so if you don't want to deal with the software, hiring freelancers is a possibility, and it's pretty affordable. So you might say, okay, well, so what all are these formatting things? What will they do? And so they'll part of formatting is you'll fit the text to the page and justify it. You'll have page numbers for print versions. You have a table of contents. You'll have fancy chapter headings. You might have an enlarged first character at the start of the chapter. You might have special formatting for the first paragraph of each chapter. You might have ornamental breaks between sections. You might have blank pages before new chapters in the print book, so that a new chapter always starts on the right-hand page. You might have a copyright section, a dedication section, acknowledgement, and other sections. And you want files that will consistently work for Amazon and for the various e-reader softwares that people who are going to try to read your book. And so the formatting software accomplishes all this. So Vellum does all this. Kindle Create does all this. If you use software to format to your book, you're going to accomplish all of these things.